Welcome to Code Your English, the home to learn and grow fast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another effective and powerful episode here at Code Your English, the place where you improve your English while also learning important lessons about life, confidence, communication, and personal growth. I am really happy that you are here today, spending a little time with me to practice your English listening and speaking. Whether you are listening while relaxing at home, walking outside, traveling, studying, or drinking a cup of tea or coffee, thank you so much for joining me. I truly hope today's episode will help you improve your English and also help you think about something important in a new and meaningful way. Today, we are going to talk about a topic that many people experience, especially English learners. The topic is, stop trying to sound smart. Start trying to be understood. Now, maybe when you first hear this sentence, you might think, what does that really mean? Well, do not worry. In today's episode, we are going to explore this idea together in a very simple and easy way. By the end of this podcast, I hope you will feel more confident, calmer, and maybe even a little freer when speaking English or communicating with other people. Let me ask you something. Have you ever tried very hard to sound smart when speaking to someone? Maybe you used difficult words because you wanted people to think that your English was very good. Maybe you tried to sound professional, intelligent, or impressive. Or maybe you worried too much about making mistakes, so you spent a lot of time thinking about every word before speaking. And let me ask you another question. Have you ever spoken English and felt nervous because you wanted everything to sound perfect? Maybe you worried about grammar. Maybe you worried about pronunciation. Maybe you worried that people would think you are not smart if you made mistakes. If you have ever felt this way, trust me, you are not alone. Many people feel like this, especially when learning a new language. Sometimes, when we want to sound smart, we start making communication harder. We choose difficult words that we do not normally use. We try to make long sentences. We speak too fast. We try very hard to sound perfect. But something interesting happens. Sometimes people stop understanding us. And when people do not understand us, communication becomes difficult. You see, communication is not a competition. It is not about showing people how intelligent you are. It is not about using the biggest words in the dictionary. And it is not about sounding perfect all the time. The real purpose of communication is something much simpler and much more important. Communication is about helping people understand us. It is about sharing ideas, feelings, thoughts, and experiences in a way that other people can follow easily. Think about the people you enjoy listening to. Usually, they are not the people who use very confusing words or speak in complicated ways. Usually, they are the people who explain things clearly. They speak in a way that feels easy, comfortable, and natural. They make difficult ideas feel simple. And because of that, we trust them, enjoy listening to them, and understand them better. This is especially important for English learners. Sometimes we think, if I use difficult English, people will think I am smart. But the truth is something different. Good communication is not about difficult English. Good communication is about clear English. If someone understands you clearly, then you are already communicating successfully. That is something to feel proud of. So today, together, we are going to talk about why many people try to sound smart, why this sometimes causes problems, and how learning to be understood can actually make you a better communicator and even a more confident English speaker. So, take a deep breath, relax, and enjoy this conversation with me here on Code Your English. Let's begin this journey together. Why many people try to sound smart. Now that we have introduced today's topic, let's talk about something important. Why do so many people try so hard to sound smart? Why do people sometimes choose difficult words, complicated sentences, or speak in a way that sounds very serious or professional? If we want to understand this topic deeply, we first need to understand the reason behind this behavior. The truth is, most people are not trying to do something bad. In many cases, people try to sound smart because they simply want respect. Deep inside, many of us want people to listen to us, value our ideas, and think positively about us. We want others to see us as capable, intelligent, and confident. This is very human. Almost everyone wants respect in some way. Think about a student in a classroom. Maybe the student wants classmates or teachers to think highly of them. So, instead of speaking simply, they start using difficult vocabulary that they learned recently. Sometimes the words sound impressive, but sometimes even the student does not fully understand how to use them correctly. The goal is not really communication anymore. The goal becomes looking smart. The same thing can happen at work. Imagine someone in a meeting. Instead of explaining an idea clearly, they use long and complicated words because they want to sound professional. Maybe they think simple language sounds weak or not serious. But something interesting often happens. People become confused. Some people stop listening. Others may pretend to understand, even when they do not. In the end, the message becomes unclear. Another reason people try to sound smart is because they want to impress others. Maybe they want friends, co-workers, teachers, or even strangers to think, "Wow, this person is really intelligent." Sometimes we care too much about what other people think about us. We worry that simple language will make us look less educated or less successful. But here is something important to remember. Most people are not impressed by confusing communication. People usually remember clear communication more than complicated communication. When someone explains something in a simple and understandable way, we often think, "This person really knows what they are talking about." There is also another reason behind this behavior, and that is fear. Yes, fear. Many people are afraid of looking weak, uneducated, or not smart enough. Sometimes people believe that if they speak simply, others may judge them. So they hide behind difficult words or complicated speech. They think, if I sound intelligent, maybe people will respect me more. For English learners, this fear can feel even stronger. Maybe you have experienced this before. You want to speak English well, so you try very hard to sound fluent. You search for advanced vocabulary. You try to use long sentences. Maybe you even practice difficult expressions that native speakers use. Of course, learning new words is a good thing. There is nothing wrong with improving your vocabulary. But sometimes, learners become so focused on sounding advanced that they forget the most important thing: communication. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine someone asks you, "How was your weekend?" A simple answer could be, "It was nice. I stayed home, watched movies, and relaxed." Very clear, very natural, easy to understand, but sometimes people try too hard to sound impressive. They may say something much longer with difficult words that do not feel natural, and suddenly the conversation feels uncomfortable. The listener becomes confused instead of connected. Another common thing people do when trying to sound smart is speaking too fast. They think fast speaking sounds fluent or professional. But speaking too quickly often makes communication harder. The listener may miss words or stop understanding completely. Clear communication is usually calm communication. Speaking slowly does not make you less intelligent. In fact, people often trust speakers who are calm and clear. Some people also make their sentences very long because they think long sentences sound more professional or educated. But long sentences can become confusing. Sometimes people forget the main point because there are too many ideas together. A short and clear sentence can often be much stronger than a long and confusing one. And we also need to talk about something that affects many people today: social media and society. When we go online, we often see people trying to look perfect, successful, intelligent, or highly educated. Sometimes people use complicated language to sound important. Slowly, this creates pressure. We begin to think, maybe I also need to sound smarter. Maybe simple speaking is not enough. But here is something very important that I want you to remember. Real communication is not about performance. It is not about showing people how smart you are. It is about helping people understand your thoughts, ideas, feelings, and experiences. Trying too hard to sound smart can sometimes create the opposite result. Instead of helping people understand us, we make communication more difficult. Instead of creating connection, we create confusion. And instead of sounding confident, sometimes we sound nervous because we are trying too hard. The truth is, some of the smartest people in the world explain things in very simple ways. Why? Because they understand something powerful. Being understood is more important than sounding impressive. And this lesson can completely change the way we communicate, especially as English learners here on Code Your English. The real purpose of communication. Now that we understand why many people try to sound smart, let us talk about something even more important. What is the real purpose of communication? Why do we communicate in the first place? Why do humans speak, listen, write, and share ideas with each other? If you think about it deeply, communication is not really about sounding intelligent. It is not about using the biggest words, having perfect grammar all the time, or trying to impress people with how much we know. The real purpose of communication is much simpler than many people think. Communication is about connection. It is about helping people understand us and helping us understand other people. Think about the people in your life. Maybe your family, friends, teachers, co-workers, or classmates. When you speak with them, what are you really trying to do? Usually, you are trying to share something. Maybe you want to explain an idea. Maybe you want someone to understand your feelings. Maybe you want to ask for help, solve a problem, tell a story, or simply enjoy a good conversation. In all these situations, the real goal is not to sound smart. The goal is understanding. Imagine this simple situation. You are asking someone for directions because you are lost in a city. Now imagine that person gives you a very confusing answer, using difficult words and long explanations. You may feel even more lost than before. But what if the person simply says, "Go straight, turn left at the bank, and the station is on your right"? Simple, clear, easy to understand. In this case, communication works because the message is clear. This is something many people forget. Communication is successful when people understand the message. That is the real success. Not sounding impressive, not looking perfect, not using difficult vocabulary, just understanding. Sometimes people believe that complicated words make them sound more intelligent. But here is something interesting. Simple words are often stronger. Why? Because simple words are easier to understand, easier to remember, and easier to connect with. When people understand your message clearly, they feel closer to you. They trust you more. They enjoy listening to you more. Let me give you a very simple example. Imagine someone says, "My cognitive processing capabilities are currently experiencing exhaustion." That sounds very complicated, right? Now imagine someone says, "I feel mentally tired." The second sentence is much simpler. Most people understand it immediately. The meaning is clear. The communication is successful. Here is another example. Imagine someone says, "It would be highly advantageous for us to commence nutritional consumption." That sounds very serious and difficult, but another person simply says, "Let's eat." The second sentence feels natural, clear, and easy. Both sentences mean almost the same thing, but one creates confusion, while the other creates understanding. This does not mean difficult words are always bad. Of course not. Learning vocabulary is important, especially for English learners. Sometimes difficult words are useful in schools, work, science, or professional situations. But the problem starts when we use difficult language only to impress people or to look smarter than others. That is when communication becomes weaker. The best speakers in the world often focus on one thing: clarity. They ask themselves an important question: will people understand me? They do not only think about how smart they sound. They think about the listener. They care about making the message easy to follow. Good communication is not selfish. It is thoughtful. It means thinking about the other person. It means speaking in a way that makes listening easier, not harder. It means choosing words that help people understand, instead of making them confused. This lesson is especially important for English learners listening to Code Your English today. Sometimes you may feel pressure to use advanced English to sound fluent. Maybe you think, if I use difficult words, people will think my English is very good. But please remember something important. Clear English is powerful English. You do not need to sound perfect to communicate well. You do not need to know every difficult word in the dictionary. You do not need long, complicated sentences to sound confident. What really matters is this: can people understand you? Because if people understand your message, if they understand your feelings, your ideas, your questions, or your stories, then your communication is already successful. And honestly, that is something to feel proud of. So maybe the real question is not, how smart do I sound? Maybe the better question is, am I helping people understand me? Because in the end, communication is not about showing off. Communication is about connection. And connection begins with understanding. Why simple language is powerful. Now let us talk about something that many English learners really need to hear, and maybe even hear again and again. Simple language is powerful. Yes, simple language. Not complicated language. Not difficult vocabulary that nobody understands. Not long sentences that make people confused. Sometimes, the strongest communication is actually the simplest communication. Many people believe that if they want to sound intelligent, successful, professional, or fluent in English, they must use big vocabulary. They think they need difficult words, advanced grammar, or long explanations to sound impressive. But this idea is not always true. In fact, Sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes simple language makes you sound more confident, more natural, and easier to trust. Let me explain why. When people understand you easily, they feel comfortable listening to you. They feel connected to your message. They do not have to work hard to understand what you mean. This is why simplicity is actually a kind of strength. It takes confidence to speak clearly and simply. It takes understanding to explain something in an easy way. Think about great teachers for a moment. Imagine your favorite teacher, maybe from school or maybe someone online. Why do people love good teachers? Usually, it is not because they use difficult language all the time. Good teachers are good because they explain difficult ideas in simple ways. They take something confusing and make it easy to understand. For example, imagine a math teacher trying to explain a difficult problem. A poor teacher might explain it in a confusing way with too many complicated words. Students become lost and frustrated. But a great teacher explains it step by step using simple language. Suddenly, students begin to understand. They feel happy and confident. This is real communication. The same thing happens in everyday life. Think about people you enjoy listening to. Maybe a speaker, a podcast host, a friend, or even someone on YouTube. Usually, they are easy to understand. Their message feels clear. They explain things naturally. Even difficult ideas feel easier because they communicate in a simple way. Many successful speakers understand something important. Clarity matters more than complexity. They know that communication is not about showing how many difficult words they know. Communication is about helping people understand the message. And this is especially important for all of you learning English here with me on Code Your English. Sometimes, English learners put too much pressure on themselves. Maybe you think, I need advanced vocabulary to sound fluent. Or maybe you worry, my English sounds too simple. But I want you to remember something important today. You do not need a huge vocabulary to speak good English. Let me say that again because it matters so much. You do not need big vocabulary to speak good English. Good English is clear English. Good English is communication that people understand. Imagine two people speaking English. One person uses many difficult words, but sounds nervous and confusing. The other person uses simple words, but speaks clearly and confidently. Which person communicates better? Most likely, the second person. For example, instead of trying to say something very complicated, you can simply say, I feel tired, instead of using difficult expressions. You can say, I don't understand, instead of trying to sound more advanced. You can say, can you explain again? Instead of staying silent because you are worried about sounding perfect. Simple English does not mean weak English. Simple English does not mean bad English. And simple English definitely does not mean you are not intelligent. Actually, speaking clearly shows confidence. It shows that you care about communication. Sometimes people think professional people always speak in difficult ways, but many professional people actually speak very clearly. Why? Because they want people to understand their ideas. A business leader, teacher, doctor, or speaker often tries to make difficult ideas easier, not harder. Simple English can still sound professional. Simple English can still sound smart. And most importantly, simple English can help you connect with people. So please stop thinking that you must always sound advanced to sound good. Do not feel embarrassed if your English is simple right now. Simple English is still real English. Every fluent speaker started somewhere. Every confident speaker once struggled too. Your goal is not to sound perfect. Your goal is not to impress everyone with difficult vocabulary. Your goal is to communicate clearly, confidently, and naturally. Because when people understand you, when conversations feel easier, and when you can express your thoughts without fear, that is real progress. And that is something truly powerful. Common mistakes people make when trying to sound smart. Now let us talk about some common mistakes people make when they try too hard to sound smart. This part is very important because many of us do these things without even realizing it. And please remember, this is not about judging anyone. We are all learning. We all make communication mistakes sometimes. The goal is simply to understand these habits so we can become better and clearer communicators. One very common mistake is using difficult words without fully understanding them. This happens more often than people think. Sometimes someone learns a new word and becomes excited to use it immediately. They want to sound intelligent or advanced, especially in English conversations. But sometimes the word is used in the wrong situation, or the meaning is not completely clear. For example, imagine a student trying to sound professional during a conversation at school. Instead of saying, "I disagree with this idea," they use a difficult word they recently learned, but they use it incorrectly. Suddenly, the message becomes confusing. The listener may not understand what they really mean. In this situation, simple words would actually communicate the idea much better. And honestly, this happens to many English learners too. Maybe you have learned advanced vocabulary and wanted to use it because it feels exciting. That is completely normal. Learning new words is good, but sometimes simple words work better than difficult words. Communication becomes stronger when the message is clear. Another common mistake is speaking too fast. Many people think fast speaking sounds smart, professional, or fluent. Especially for English learners, there is often pressure to sound like native speakers very quickly. Some people believe, if I speak fast, people will think my English is good. But here is the truth. Speaking too fast often creates confusion. People may miss your words. Your pronunciation may become unclear. Even if your grammar is good, the listener may still struggle to understand you. Imagine a job interview. Someone speaks very quickly because they are nervous and want to sound confident. But the interviewer keeps asking, "Sorry, can you repeat that?" Now the speaker feels even more nervous. Speaking calmly and clearly often sounds more confident than speaking too fast. Another mistake people make is talking too much. Sometimes when people want to sound smart, they explain things for too long. They keep talking and talking because they think more words mean more intelligence. But too much talking can sometimes make communication weaker. Think about a classroom situation. A student asks a simple question, but another student answers with a very long explanation that becomes confusing. Everyone starts losing attention because the main idea becomes lost. In real life, shorter and clearer communication is often stronger. This does not mean you should never explain things deeply. Of course, sometimes detailed explanations are useful, but good communicators know when to stop, when to simplify, and when to make the message easier to follow. Another very common mistake is making sentences too long. Maybe you have heard someone speak like this before. One sentence becomes so long that by the end, people forget what the person was trying to say in the beginning. This often happens when someone wants to sound very educated or professional. For example, instead of simply saying, "I think this idea could help us," someone may create a long and complicated sentence full of difficult words. The listener becomes tired or confused. A simple sentence could have done the job much better. Trying to sound perfect is another mistake many people make, especially English learners. Maybe this sounds familiar to you. You want every sentence to be perfect. You think too much about grammar. You stop yourself many times while speaking because you are afraid of making mistakes. But here is something important to understand. Perfection can sometimes hurt communication. When you focus too much on sounding perfect, you may stop sounding natural. Conversations become stressful instead of enjoyable. You become afraid instead of confident. In friendships, this happens too. Sometimes people try so hard to sound intelligent that conversations stop feeling natural. Instead of listening and connecting, people focus too much on impressing each other. But friendship is not about performance. Friendship is about connection, understanding, and trust. And finally, maybe the biggest mistake of all is forgetting the listener. This is something many people do when trying to sound smart. They focus only on themselves. How do I sound? Do I sound intelligent? Do I sound impressive? But good communication asks a different question. Can this person understand me? A great speaker always thinks about the listener. Are they confused? Are they following the conversation? Are the words too difficult? Good communication is not only about speaking, it is also about helping others understand. Whether you are at school, work, a job interview, talking with friends, or practicing English, remember this important lesson. Communication is not a performance. You are not standing on a stage trying to prove how smart you are. Communication is connection. It is about sharing ideas clearly, listening carefully, and helping people understand your message. And sometimes, the clearest speaker in the room is actually the smartest communicator. The problem of speaking to impress instead of helping. Now let us talk about a hidden problem that many people do not notice when they try too hard to sound smart. Sometimes, without realizing it, we stop trying to help people understand us and start trying to impress them instead. And this small change can create a big problem in communication. At first, trying to sound smart may seem like a good thing. Maybe you want people to respect you. Maybe you want to look professional, educated, or confident. Maybe you think difficult words and long explanations will make people admire you more. But something interesting often happens when communication becomes too complicated. People slowly stop listening. Yes, this happens more than we think. When communication becomes confusing, listeners often become tired. Imagine listening to someone who uses difficult vocabulary all the time, speaks very quickly, or explains simple things in a complicated way. After some time, your mind starts feeling tired. You may still be sitting there, but your attention slowly disappears. You stop following the message because understanding becomes too difficult. This is not because people are lazy or unintelligent. It happens because our brains naturally prefer clear communication. When something feels simple and easy to understand, we stay interested. We keep listening. But when communication feels confusing, our attention starts moving away. Think about a teacher and a student. Imagine a teacher trying to explain something difficult in class. One teacher uses very complicated words and speaks in a confusing way. The students become quiet, confused, and maybe even nervous to ask questions. Some students stop paying attention because they feel lost. Now, imagine another teacher. This teacher explains the same topic slowly and clearly. They use simple examples. They make difficult ideas easier to understand. Students feel more comfortable. They ask questions. They feel confident because they understand what is happening. Which teacher would you rather learn from? Most people would choose the second teacher. Why? Because clear communication helps people grow. Good teachers do not try to impress students with difficult words. They try to help students understand. The same thing happens in friendships. Imagine your friend is having a difficult time and asks for advice. Maybe they are sad, confused, or stressed. Now imagine you answer them with complicated words and long explanations that sound very intellectual but are hard to understand. Your friend may feel even more confused than before. But what if you simply say, "I understand how you feel." Maybe take things one step at a time. You are not alone. Suddenly, the message feels warm, clear, and supportive. In friendship, people do not need perfect language. They need understanding. They need someone who communicates with kindness and clarity. This also happens in workplaces. Sometimes people believe that sounding professional means sounding complicated. In meetings, some people use difficult business words or very long sentences to sound intelligent. But often, this creates confusion. Imagine a manager explaining an important task in a confusing way. Employees leave the meeting unsure about what they should actually do. Mistakes happen because the message was unclear. Now imagine another manager who says things clearly and simply. Everyone understands their role. People feel confident because expectations are easy to follow. In many workplaces, clear communication saves time, reduces stress, and builds better teamwork. And here is something very important to understand. Confusing communication often creates distance between people. When people do not understand us, they may feel disconnected. They may stop asking questions because they feel embarrassed. They may feel nervous or uncomfortable. Slowly, communication becomes colder and weaker. But simple communication often creates trust. When someone explains things clearly, we feel safe listening to them. We trust them more because they make us feel included instead of confused. We feel respected because they care about helping us understand. This is especially important for English learners listening to Code Your English today. Sometimes you may feel pressure to sound advanced, impressive, or perfect. But please remember something important. People are not waiting for perfect English. People are waiting for clear English. The goal is not to sound smarter than everyone else. The goal is to connect, to help people understand, to make communication easier instead of harder. And maybe this is one of the most important lessons in today's episode. The smartest communicator is often the clearest communicator. Not the person using the biggest vocabulary, not the person speaking the fastest, not the person trying hardest to impress others. The person who truly communicates well is usually the one who says things clearly, kindly, and simply enough for people to understand. Because real communication is not about showing people how smart you are. Real communication is about helping people feel understood. How to speak so people understand you better. Now that we have talked about the problems of trying too hard to sound smart, let us focus on something practical. How can you actually speak so people understand you better? What small things can you do in daily life? English conversations, school, work, or friendships to become a clearer communicator. The good news is this: you do not need to change everything. You do not need perfect English. You do not need advanced vocabulary. Sometimes, small changes can make a very big difference. Let us start with something simple but powerful. Use simple words. Many people think difficult words make communication better, but often, simple words are stronger because they are easier to understand. Imagine you are talking to someone and you say something in a clear and natural way. The listener understands quickly, feels comfortable, and the conversation becomes easier. For example, instead of saying something very complicated like, "I am experiencing emotional exhaustion," you can simply say, "I feel tired," or "I feel stressed." The message becomes easier to understand. Clear communication is not weak communication. Clear communication is smart communication. Another important tip is to speak slowly. This is especially important for English learners. Sometimes people speak very fast because they want to sound fluent or confident. But fast speaking can create confusion. Your pronunciation may become unclear, and listeners may struggle to follow your message. Speaking slowly does not make you sound less intelligent. In fact, calm and slow speaking often sounds more confident. It gives people time to understand your words. It also gives your brain more time to think clearly. Imagine someone asking you a question in English. You do not need to answer like a machine. You can take a moment, think, and speak naturally. A calm speaker is often easier to trust than a rushed speaker. Another useful habit is keeping your sentences shorter. Sometimes people make very long sentences because they want to sound professional or educated. But long sentences can become confusing very quickly. The listener may forget the main idea before the sentence even ends. Instead, try breaking your ideas into smaller sentences. For example, instead of saying everything in one very long sentence, say one idea at a time. This makes communication feel lighter and easier to follow. Here is another powerful question to ask yourself whenever you speak. Will this person understand me? This question can completely change the way you communicate. Instead of thinking, "Do I sound smart?" start thinking, "Am I being clear?" Good communication always thinks about the listener. Imagine you are explaining something to a friend. Are they confused? Do they understand? Should you explain more simply? Good communicators care about helping people understand. Giving examples is another great way to make communication stronger. Sometimes ideas feel difficult until we see an example. Imagine someone says, "Confidence matters." That sounds okay. But if they add an example like, for example, speaking clearly in a meeting even if your English is not perfect, suddenly the message becomes easier to understand. Examples help people imagine situations. They make ideas feel more real and practical. And here is another simple habit that many people forget. Pause sometimes. You do not need to speak non-stop. Small pauses are helpful. They give listeners time to understand your message. They also give you time to think about what you want to say next. Many confident speakers pause naturally. They do not rush. They stay calm. And because of this, people enjoy listening to them more. Now let us practice something together. Let us take difficult speech and make it simpler. Imagine someone says, "I possess a substantial degree of uncertainty regarding the possible consequences of this decision." That sounds very heavy and confusing, right? Now let us make it simple. "I am not sure what will happen if we choose this." Same meaning. much easier to understand. Here is another example. Instead of saying, "Your participation in this activity would be highly advantageous," you can simply say, "This activity could really help you." Simple, clear, natural. You do not lose intelligence when you speak simply. You gain clarity. And remember this important lesson from today's episode. Speaking well is not about using the most difficult words in the room. It is about helping people understand your message. So the next time you speak English, try something different. Use simple words. Slow down. Keep sentences shorter. Think about the listener. Give examples. Pause sometimes. And ask yourself one simple question. Will this person understand me? Because when people understand you clearly, communication becomes easier, conversations become better, and confidence starts growing naturally. Special advice for English learners. Before we move forward, I want to take a moment to speak directly to all the English learners listening to Code Your English today. This part is especially for you. If you are learning English right now, I want you to remember something very important. Please stop chasing perfect English all the time. Yes, learning grammar matters. Yes, learning vocabulary matters. And yes, improving pronunciation is helpful too. But many learners become too focused on perfection. They think, "I must speak perfectly. I cannot make mistakes. I need advanced words to sound fluent." And because of this pressure, many people become afraid to speak at all. Maybe this sounds familiar to you. You want to join a conversation, but you stay quiet because you are worried about grammar mistakes. Maybe you know what you want to say, but fear stops you. Maybe you think, "What if people laugh?" Or, "What if my English sounds bad?" But here is something I really want you to understand today. Communication matters more than perfection. The goal of language is communication. Language exists so people can understand each other. So instead of asking yourself, "Was my English perfect?" maybe ask yourself a different question. Did people understand me? Because if people understood your message, then you are already doing something amazing. You do not need perfect English to have good conversations. You do not need difficult vocabulary to connect with people. Clear English is powerful English. Imagine two English learners. The first learner knows many difficult words, but feels afraid to speak. They think too much, worry too much, and stay silent because they want everything to be perfect. The second learner uses simple English. Maybe their grammar is not perfect. Maybe they make mistakes sometimes. But they speak. They practice. They communicate. They ask questions. They try again. Now think about this. Who will improve faster? Usually it is the second person. Why? Because confidence grows through practice. Nobody becomes confident by waiting to become perfect. Confidence comes from speaking, making mistakes, learning, and trying again. Every conversation teaches you something. Every mistake teaches you something. And please remember this because it matters so much. Mistakes are okay. Mistakes are not proof that you are failing. Mistakes are proof that you are learning. Even fluent speakers make mistakes sometimes. Even native speakers say the wrong thing, forget words, or speak imperfectly. Most people are not judging your grammar as much as you think. In real life, people care more about understanding you than listening to perfect grammar. They care about your message. They care about connection. If someone understands your idea, your feeling, your story, or your question, then communication is already working. So please be patient with yourself. Speak even when your English feels simple. Speak even when you feel nervous. Trust the learning process. Little by little, conversation by conversation, your confidence will grow. And always remember this here on Code Your English. You do not need perfect English to have a powerful voice. You only need the courage to speak, the willingness to practice, and the confidence to keep going. Final reflection. What does being understood really mean? Now, before we slowly come to the end of this episode, let us take a deeper moment to reflect on everything we have talked about. This is not just about English learning anymore. This is about communication in real life, in your daily conversations, in your studies, in your work, and in your relationships. So I want you to slow down for a moment and really think about this question. What does it truly mean to be understood? Being understood is something very simple, but also very powerful. It means that when you speak, the other person can clearly receive your message. They do not feel confused. They do not need to guess what you mean. They do not feel lost in your words. Instead, they can easily understand your ideas, your thoughts, and your feelings. That is real communication. That is the moment when language actually works. Now let me ask you something important. Do you usually speak to impress people, or do you speak to connect with them? Think about your recent conversations, maybe in English, maybe in your native language too. When you speak, are you thinking more about how you sound, or are you thinking about how well the other person understands you? This is a very honest question, and there is no right or wrong answer. Many people, especially learners, naturally try to impress others. It is human. We want to be respected. We want to feel intelligent. We want others to notice us in a positive way. So we sometimes focus on sounding smart, using better words, or speaking in a more advanced way. But in that process, we can forget something very important: the person listening. Let me ask you another question. When you finish speaking, do you feel that people really understood your message? Or do you sometimes feel that your words were too complicated, too fast, or not clear enough? Sometimes we think we are communicating well, but the listener is actually confused, and we do not even notice it. This is why reflection is so important. Communication is not only about speaking. It is also about checking if your message is reaching the other person. If people are not understanding you, then maybe the problem is not your intelligence. Maybe the problem is that the message is too complex, too long, or too focused on sounding impressive instead of being clear. Sometimes we make communication harder than it needs to be. We add too many words. We try to sound more formal than necessary. We try to build perfect sentences in our mind before speaking. And while doing that, the natural flow of conversation becomes difficult. Instead of helping the listener, we create distance. But when we simplify our language, something beautiful happens. People relax. They understand us faster. Conversations feel easier. There is less pressure and more connection. And slowly, communication becomes something enjoyable instead of stressful. So I want you to sit with this idea for a moment. Are you making communication easier or harder for the person listening to you? Are you helping them understand your message, or are you trying to show them how intelligent you are? Because at the end of the day, being understood is more important than sounding smart. This is not about lowering your intelligence. It is not about speaking in a basic way all the time. It is about choosing clarity over complexity when you communicate. It is about making sure your message reaches the heart and mind of the listener. Think about the people who communicate best in your life. They are probably not the ones who use the most complicated language. They are the ones who make things simple. They are the ones who explain clearly. They are the ones who make you feel comfortable and included in the conversation. And that is exactly what we should aim for in our own communication. So as you reflect on this episode, I want you to remember one simple truth. You do not need to sound like the smartest person in the room. You just need to make sure your message is clear enough to be understood. Because when you are understood, real connection happens. And that is what communication is truly about. Now, before we slowly come to the end of this episode, let us take a deeper moment to reflect on everything we have talked about. This is not just about English learning anymore. This is about communication in real life, in your daily conversations, in your studies, in your work, and in your relationships. So, I want you to slow down for a moment and really think about this question. What does it truly mean to be understood? Being understood is something very simple, but also very powerful. It means that when you speak, the other person can clearly receive your message. They do not feel confused. They do not need to guess what you mean. They do not feel lost in your words. Instead, they can easily understand your ideas, your thoughts, and your feelings. That is real communication. That is the moment when language actually works. Now, let me ask you something important. Do you usually speak to impress people, or do you speak to connect with them? Think about your recent conversations, maybe in English, maybe in your native language too. When you speak, are you thinking more about how you sound, or are you thinking about how well the other person understands you? This is a very honest question, and there is no right or wrong answer. Many people, especially learners, naturally try to impress others. It is human. We want to be respected. We want to feel intelligent. We want others to notice us in a positive way. So we sometimes focus on sounding smart, using better words, or speaking in a more advanced way. But in that process, we can forget something very important: the person listening. Let me ask you another question. When you finish speaking, do you feel that people really understood your message? Or do you sometimes feel that your words were too complicated, too fast, or not clear enough? Sometimes we think we are communicating well, but the listener is actually confused, and we do not even notice it. This is why reflection is so important. Communication is not only about speaking, it is also about checking if your message is reaching the other person. If people are not understanding you, then maybe the problem is not your intelligence. Maybe the problem is that the message is too complex, too long, or too focused on sounding impressive instead of being clear. Sometimes we make communication harder than it needs to be. We add too many words. We try to sound more formal than necessary. We try to build perfect sentences in our mind before speaking. And while doing that, the natural flow of conversation becomes difficult. Instead of helping the listener, we create distance. But when we simplify our language, something beautiful happens. People relax. They understand us faster. Conversations feel easier. There is less pressure and more connection. And slowly, communication becomes something enjoyable instead of stressful. So I want you to sit with this idea for a moment. Are you making communication easier or harder for the person listening to you? Are you helping them understand your message, or are you trying to show them how intelligent you are? Because at the end of the day, being understood is more important than sounding smart. This is not about lowering your intelligence. It is not about speaking in a basic way all the time. It is about choosing clarity over complexity when you communicate. It is about making sure your message reaches the heart and mind of the listener. Think about the people who communicate best in your life. They are probably not the ones who use the most complicated language. They are the ones who make things simple. They are the ones who explain clearly. They are the ones who make you feel comfortable and included in the conversation. And that is exactly what we should aim for in our own communication. So, as you reflect on this episode, I want you to remember one simple truth. You do not need to sound like the smartest person in the room. You just need to make sure your message is clear enough to be understood. Because when you are understood, real connection happens, and that is what communication is truly about. Now, before we say goodbye, let me leave you with a final message from my heart to yours. Your voice matters. Even if your English is not perfect yet, even if you sometimes struggle to find the right words, your voice is still important. You have ideas, feelings, and thoughts that deserve to be shared. Do not hide your voice just because you are afraid of making mistakes or not sounding advanced enough. Every time you speak, you are improving. Every sentence you say is a step forward. And you do not need difficult words to make your voice powerful. You only need honesty and clarity. Simple English can still be strong English. Simple words can still carry deep meaning. What matters most is not how complicated your language is, but how clearly your message reaches another person. Speaking clearly is a skill, and like any skill, it grows with practice. You do not become a confident speaker in one day. You become confident by trying, speaking, making mistakes, and trying again. Every conversation is practice. Every small attempt matters more than you think. So keep speaking, keep practicing, keep improving step by step. Do not wait for perfect English before you start speaking. Start now with what you already know. Because progress comes from action, not perfection. And always remember, simple English is powerful English. It is the kind of English that builds real communication, real understanding, and real connection between people. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today here on Code Your English. I truly appreciate you being part of this journey. Keep practicing your English every day, even if it is just a few minutes. Stay focused on communication, not perfection.